Warships are the ultimate symbol of a nation's military might.
These things are monstrous wonders of technology.
Enormous vessels, crewed by thousands, bristling with massive guns and powerful aircraft, they can deliver terrifying destruction and turn the tide of history.
The ship was built to win the war. There was no other reason.
From the beginning of the 20th century to the present day, these are the stories of classic warships. From Dreadnoughts to Bismarck, to Japan's monster sea warrior Yamato, the American superships Wisconsin, Lexington, and Enterprise, to today's cutting-edge Royal Navy carriers. These are the world's greatest warships. Halfway through World War I, over 200 warships clashed in the era's defining naval battle. The Battle of Jutland. Over 25 ships and thousands of men were sent to the bottom. The loss was a shock, but there was also success. On both sides, a new type of ship had dished out massive damage and taken many huge hits, yet remained afloat, able to return to base for repair. These were the war machines that sparked the arms race that changed the world.
It was a menacing, dangerous-looking ship, and everybody wanted one.
These were the Dreadnoughts, but they only came about because of a book. In 1890, an American naval officer called Alfred Thayer Mahan published a detailed study of British naval strategy.
Mahan's book on the influence of sea power on history was a painstaking analysis, in effect, of how Britain came to be so big in the world.
Andrew Gordon is a naval historian.
Mahan's book explains something nobody had worried their heads about. How could it happen that this little rainy country off the northwest of Europe had this huge global presence? And the answer, of course, was sea power.
It had been 90 years since Nelson's decisive victory at Trafalgar, and Britain was the most powerful nation in the world. Its sea lanes policed by a Royal Navy that dwarfed its rivals. Rivals who'd had enough of playing second fiddle.
Britain was looked at by other nations with a mixture of envy and admiration, especially on the German side.
Jan Witt teaches early 20th century German history.
Germany was fully industrialized and was a blooming economy. Nevertheless, at that point of time, in military and strategic terms, it was still a continental power.
Germany's ambitious emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm II, was a big fan of Mahan's book.
The main argument of Mahan was, if you want to be a world power, you need a strong navy. So this was the ideology the Kaiser embraced to make Germany by this a world power.
Germany quickly started to build a powerful new fleet to rival a Royal Navy that was becoming increasingly bloated.
On paper, the fleet is unquestionably the mightiest navy in the world. But if you look closely, there were a vast number of ships that were no longer fit for purpose.
Andrew Chung is one of the curators at the Royal Museums in Greenwich.
The problem was that in any kind of shooting war, while they were perfectly good for imperial policing, they would struggle to survive against the more modern ships that were being deployed by smaller navies.
The German build-up focused British minds on the need to modernise, and in 1904 the Royal Navy appointed a radical new leader.
The very colourful Admiral Jackie Fisher becomes the first Sea Lord, and effectively the Royal Navy is his. Within certain limits, he can stamp his style on it, do what he wants with it, and he already has in his mind this concept of the super battleship of the future. This ship embodies two very important elements. One is very, very high speed. Fisher was all about having tactical superiority by being able to run rings around the opposition. The other is superior firepower, vastly superior firepower.
Fisher's problem was that his concept was based on theories rather than experience. He needed facts to back up his ideas. What Jackie Fisher needed was a war. Since 1903, Japan and Russia had been at war on land and sea over who controlled large parts of Southeast Asia. The defining moment came in 1905 with a naval battle in the Straits of Tsushima.
The interesting thing about Tsushima is it's the first battle to come for an awfully long time.
Nick Hewitt is head of exhibitions at the National Museum of the Royal Navy.
You have to go back nearly 100 years, really, to find the last big fleet action that anybody takes any notice of. You look at the Napoleonic Wars. Battles fought between ships powered by sail power, made of wood, firing muzzle-loading cannons. Fast forward 100 years and you've got steel battleships with rifled guns in revolving turrets powered by steam engines. And nobody has tried this technology out. It's never really been used in action before.
Now, this was a very, very mismatched conflict. Russia was an established European power, and although Japan had modernized to an incredible degree in the last few decades, no one really thought that an Asian upstart would be able to challenge this European giant.
The experts were wrong. Japan's navy had fast, modern ships, equipped with powerful 12-inch guns and Royal Navy-trained crews. Russia's was dated and ill-prepared. During the battle, the Japanese ships outmaneuvered the Russians. Their guns were more accurate and effective at a greater range. The results were devastating.
It was a total wipeout of the Russian fleet.
49 out of 52 Russian ships were sunk or captured. This decisive victory won Japan the war.
Tsushima is an earthquake. It's an absolute culture shock to the great powers.
The upstart has won, and the upstart has won because they possess the superior battle fleet.
The message was modernize. Modernize or die.
As the 20th century began, Britain's status as the world's greatest sea power was under threat. The Navy's fleet was becoming dated, and Germany was building up an ever more ominous collection of warships. But new naval supremo Jackie Fisher believed he had an idea that would keep Britain's command of the seas intact. Now, Japan's decisive victory at the Battle of Tsushima had delivered proof that his concept for a world-beating warship was on the right track.
He wanted a ship with big punch, that was fast, and that could keep out of the range of enemy gunfire. And that ship was called Dreadnought.
Jackie Fisher planned to create the world's first all-big-gun battleship. An unprecedented 10 12-inch guns in 5 turrets would deliver accurate and deadly fire over a huge range. The latest engines would give smoother, more reliable power, allowing her to outpace her rivals and dictate the battle. A belt of face-hardened armor would protect her main control rooms, turrets, and magazines. completing the formidable package that would make HMS Dreadnought the most powerful warship ever built. As if that wasn't enough, Fisher wanted the launch of his new ship to take his rivals by surprise.
Fisher had set a target of wanting this ship completed within a year, which was unheard of. Battleships were normally completed within 2 to 3 years from the laying of the keel, so this was a supreme effort. And he wanted this to be done quietly because he wanted the ship to have all the more impact when it was finally launched.
So Dreadnought is built in less than a year. She's in part built in less than a year because Fisher takes some clever tricks. He prefabricates steel and has it piled up on the dockside. He orders as many parts in advance as he can and only then presses the go button on building the ship.
One of the great problems when you're building a ship in this period is that the guns and the turrets take almost longer to manufacture than the ship itself. Luckily for Fisher, 2 large battleships were being constructed for the Royal Navy at the same time as Dreadnought, and their turrets and the gun calibers were exactly what he wanted. So these 4 turrets were reallocated to Dreadnought, which meant that she could be completed on schedule.
The unveiling of Fisher's vision for a new era of British naval supremacy arrived in 1906, when King Edward VII launched HMS Dreadnought at Portsmouth Naval Dockyard. Predictably, it was her all-big gun layout that impressed witnesses the most.
A ship apparently invincible and capable of one discharge from her guns of throwing with unparalleled force twice as much metal as any foreign man of war now afloat, and 3 times as much as most.
Neither Dreadnought nor any other battleship of her day still exist, except one. Commissioned in 1914, USS Texas stands alone as a unique testament to First World War battleship technology. With her all-big gun layout still fully intact, she is able to conjure a sense of what operating her fearsome artillery was like. Andy Smith is the ship's manager.
So we're down in the belly of the ship, about 6 stories down from the top of the turret. This whole mechanism is attached to that turret and would move with the turret. And we're in the magazine, so this is where the shells are stored. So ultimately, the shells are stored in here. They're attached to this monorail system, brought through here. They hooked up to this hoist and then attached. And when it's ready to go up, boom, ring this bell, and then they're cranked up all the way to that turret eventually. So we're inside turret number 1. These are the rifles. This is the whole reason why the battleship's floating, to have these rifles available. So ultimately you'd have a round about 1,500 pounds coming all the way from the very bottom of the ship, comes up this elevator, right there, rolls over, then it gets rammed in here. And then you got 4 bags of powder that come up, get put in behind that, rammed in. They strap themselves in, they go ahead with this talking tube, guns ready to fire. They're strapped up against the wall here, out of the way of this breach. Wait. They pull the trigger. This shell traveling up to 12 miles, and then when it hits, creating a hole the size of a basketball court.
Of course, the awesome power of all those 14-inch shells was only an advantage if they hit their targets. Again, Fisher had thought this through. The idea to use a single-caliber main armament solved a problem that had long prevented guns from being used accurately at long range. Before Dreadnought, ships generally fired an array of different calibers at the same target, which meant gunnery officers often struggled to gauge ranges.
You can't correct if you have 3 different calibers of guns banging away independently, because nobody knows whose shell splashes whose. And that's what was keeping ranges in close.
To increase the effective range of its massive guns, HMS Dreadnought was the first ship with a purpose-built fire control platform.
This area is the lookout and, more importantly, the fire control position. So the gunnery officer would be based up here directing the fire of the entire main armament of the ship. This was a very, very new system for the Royal Navy. They were still evolving this when Dreadnought was built and commissioned.
By organising the guns to fire with one man, the gunnery officer, in the spotting top, who is observing the fall of shot and is pressing the button to fire salvos. And so get a group of shells landing together, and you can tell, if you're the gunnery officer in the foretop, if the shells are landing short or over, and you can correct.
To ram home their advantage, these powerful and now accurate guns needed to be brought to bear on their targets quickly and from the best angles. This meant Dreadnought needed to be faster than all of her rivals. Until now, all large warships had used huge triple expansion steam engines with massive pistons driving crankshafts. But pushing these hard caused damaging vibrations. Once again, Jackie Fisher opted for the cutting edge in technology, steam turbine engines.
Putting turbines into a large untested battleship was a very, very brave move. The technology had been proven, but not in a ship of this scale. Turbines are quieter, they're faster, they're more efficient, they are less prone to breakdowns. Dreadnought could be run at her maximum speed of almost 20 knots for sustained periods, and what this meant in practice was that she could outrun any pre-Dreadnought in existence.
To tie together the advantages of high speed and devastating firepower, HMS Dreadnought was also equipped with the very latest technology in electrical power systems, similar to one still on USS Texas today.
So this is your power distribution for the whole ship. This is as much a cutting-edge technology as those big guns, as that big armor we have, as those turbine engines that are pushing these dreadnoughts. This is the cutting edge. If you think about the average sailor that came aboard, he probably didn't have electricity in his home, and now he's coming aboard and everything's lit with fans and blowers. I mean, people would die in these ships. They get so hot. You need air movement, you need lights. All of those little things that make it all work. Those hoists to get the shells up to the top of the turret. They're running off electricity. Where's that electricity coming from? It's coming from in here. And so all of these switches are basically turning off and on power to various parts of the ship and redirecting it where needed. You imagine if a part of the ship is underwater, is being flooded because it was hit, you don't want electricity running through that. So they would shut the power down to that part of the ship, redirect it somewhere else. So you're dealing with high voltage. There's a lot of power coursing through here. And it wouldn't come as a surprise if when you did this, there'd be a little pushback. These guys down here were probably some of the bravest guys on board the ship. This is not for the faint of heart, for sure.
The really big shock had been caused by HMS Dreadnought herself. No ship had ever combined size, speed, power, and armor in such a fearsome machine.
Dreadnought, something that fears nothing. It can project power, it can secure sea lanes, it can defend a coast, it can attack a coast, it can dominate the seas.
HMS Dreadnought is a real game changer. The old vessels, the old pre-Dreadnought, as they're called now, battleships, are simply outclassed.
The creation of HMS Dreadnought was a great triumph for Fisher, but he also had created an enormous problem for himself and for the Royal Navy.
It made every other battleship in the world obsolete, including all of Britain's.
Fisher is essentially pressing the reset button on the global arms race.
The German Admiralty simply saw itself forced to build vessels like HMS Dreadnought.
It was an arms race like we saw post-World War II between the Soviet Union and the US. In the 50s, it was nukes. In the teens, it was dreadnoughts.
The US, France, and Japan all set about making their versions of HMS Dreadnought. But it was Germany's response that worried the Royal Navy.
It took the Germans a couple of years, but they succeeded in quickly designing and launching their own dreadnoughts.
Author Mark Steele specializes in the battleships of the 20th century.
The German ships were a bit different than the British designs because they emphasized protection at the expense of firepower. So they were not as heavily armed as most British ships were of the day.
By 1911, the Germans are producing designs that match Britain in quality, and in the years after that, if anything, some of their designs are beginning to pull ahead.
By 1914, Germany had truly come of age as a warship builder. Perhaps the best example was the König-class battleship. 4 were built, including SMS König herself.
So we're looking here at a magnificent plan of the König class. It's very well designed in regard of protection. So you see here a heavy deck armor. You see here a massive side armor. You see here the double bottom. In case of a mine hit, there's a great chance that the vessel will only be lightly damaged. And you see a huge number of bulkheads, which divides the vessel in watertight compartments. You see here also the number of guns listed. 10 3.5 or 12-inch main guns in 5 turrets, 14 15-centimeter guns, also 10 8.8-centimeter guns for fighting off torpedo boats. They were quick-firing or quick-loading guns, of course. 5 torpedo tubes underwater, 1 in the bow, and 4 on the broad sides. So, yeah, she was really a vessel to be reckoned with in battle.
As Germany's navy grew, the likelihood of war loomed ever larger. Formidable new ships such as König were intended to present an unacceptable risk to Britain's interests.
The idea was it should be powerful enough to cause the Royal Navy sufficient casualties that even if the German fleet lost, Britain's possessions would be vulnerable to other powers. And therefore, the Royal Navy would not want to challenge the German fleet for that reason. It would stop Britain declaring war on Germany. Well, it didn't work, did it?
In 1906, HMS Dreadnought had fired the starting pistol on the all-big-gun battleship arms race. Britain, France, the United States, Russia, Japan and Germany had all battled fiercely to build the biggest, baddest gunship the world had ever seen. By 1914, so fast was the pace of change that the original HMS Dreadnought was already past her sell-by date.
I always find it quite amusing that we look at technological development now and we get excited if there's a new smartphone comes out. But actually, in that 8-year period, these things changed beyond recognition to the point where HMS Dreadnought is obsolete by the start of the First World War.
HMS Dreadnought may have been relegated to minor fleet duties, but so indelible was her legacy that all big battleships became known as Dreadnoughts. With excellent dreadnoughts like the König, Germany had caught up with Britain in quality, but the one thing they were never able to match was quantity.
Britain has the advantage, if you compare, for example, with Germany. Germany is also trying to build the world's largest army at the same time, and they simply cannot keep up with the British, who are really 100% focused on naval building. They're building these things almost at the rate of a class of 4 every year gets ordered and laid down, and they're getting progressively bigger and bigger.
In Britain, the Navy was the senior service, while in Germany, although she had this ambition to become a world power, still was a continental power. So she needed a strong army, and so the bulk of the money spent for military was spent for the army. And this also kind of hindered, of course, a massive build-up of the fleet.
In August 1914, that powerful German army invaded Belgium, a British ally, triggering World War I.
when war breaks out and the arms race is brought to a sudden halt. The British have 22 dreadnoughts in commission. The German Navy is somewhat behind with 13. To add to this, the British have 9 battlecruisers in commission to Germany's 4. So it looks like a substantial lead in the Royal Navy's favour at the beginning of World War I.
From day one of the war, the sheer number of their ships meant the Royal Navy had the upper hand on Germany's high seas fleet. The speed of modern warships meant that the main Grand Fleet could lie secure in Scapa Flow, its new base in Scotland. With smaller fleets based in Rosyth, Harwich and on the south coast. Britain now had a very effective blockade on Germany's small section of the North Sea coast. The proud new ships of the Kaiser's fleet struggled to operate beyond their own local waters.
It's probably fair to say that at the start of the First World War, the German high seas fleet did not know what to do. Their planning had been based on an idea that the Royal Navy would follow its traditional aggressive approach and come stampeding into the southern North Sea to take them on and annihilate them in a sort of Trafalgar II.
Both sides are waiting for this apocalyptic confrontation between the two fleets. And much to everyone's frustration, this doesn't happen.
The British didn't come, so there was no decisive battle in the North Sea, as the Germans had expected. So they had to build up from scratch a new strategic approach.
So to break the deadlock, the Germans formulate a plan whereby they will try and entice a portion of the Grand Fleet out to engage them and hopefully trap and sink this detached portion with the entirety of the High Seas Fleet's strength. Once they have done this to the Royal Navy enough times, they'll then be able to meet it on equal or superior terms and win a decisive victory.
On May 31st, 1916, that exact plan was underway as bold new German commander Admiral Scheer prepared to ambush a small fleet of Royal Navy warships. His scouting fleet engaged a British battlecruiser squadron. Unlike Dreadnought battleships, battlecruisers were lightly armoured for greater speed.
Initially, the German effort goes according to plan. The two battlecruiser forces meet, and catastrophically, 2 British battlecruisers blow up and sink. This is mainly because of the way in which they're storing and using ammunition on board the ships.
On the 2 battlecruisers were 2,385 sailors. Only 20 survived. It was round 1 to Admiral Scheer. Scheer now chased the small British fleet towards the coast of Jutland, where the rest of his high seas fleet lay in wait, ready to pounce. What he didn't know was that also lying in wait was the entire British Grand Fleet. In command was Admiral Jellicoe aboard his flagship HMS Iron Duke, a bang-up-to-date battleship so advanced from the original HMS Dreadnought that she was known as a super dreadnought. Andrew Chung has an original as-completed plan of this powerful vessel.
If I lay these plans of HMS Iron Duke over the ones of HMS Dreadnought, it allows us to see the huge changes that have taken place. This ship was built a mere 7 or 8 years after Dreadnought. General improvements resulted in ships that were larger, faster, and much more powerful. This ship is a quantum leap above its near ancestor, and the differences necessitated a much larger hull to accommodate all the improvements. So again, the most noticeable thing about this ship is the primary armament, the powerful main battery of 13.5-inch guns, larger than those mounted aboard Dreadnought, but most importantly, gone are the wing turrets, which we saw in Dreadnought. Everything is on a center line, which means that when this ship engages an enemy vessel, she can bring her entire armament to bear.
The key improvements to Iron Duke were to her firepower. 8 of her 13.5-inch guns were now set in super firing pairs, meaning 4 barrels could now aim directly fore or aft. The middle turret was now centered, able to aim across both flanks. Secondary armament was beefed up, with 6-inch guns on each flank, plus smaller weapons to guard against the threat of fast-boat torpedo attack. Bigger, faster and smarter, the super dreadnoughts were built to rule the waves of the North Sea. In the churning seas off Jutland, Iron Duke led 16 other super dreadnoughts to create Admiral Jellicoe's formidable British battle line. The German battle line, led by Koenig, was now unwittingly steaming straight towards them. Perfectly positioned, Jellicoe gave the order to engage. Iron Duke took aim at Koenig and unleashed a salvo of 9 13.5-inch shells. In the next few minutes, Koenig was hit by 7 of Iron Duke's shells. Other ships scored hits as well.
She received 10 heavy, 5 to 6 lighter hits, with 45 of her crew dead and another 27 wounded, but she still was afloat.
Iron Duke leads the attack on the German line twice more that evening. Her gunners hitting Koenig again and sinking a destroyer. There's great loss on both sides.
Admiral Scheer comes to the conclusion that this is not the sort of battle he wanted. He didn't want an epic showdown, and his only thought is to disengage and get his fleet back to safety, because a number of his ships are battered by now and their combat effectiveness has been reduced. So he needs to get them home. He needs to get them home intact.
So the German fleet mostly got home, and got home before our fleet got home, because it happened close to Denmark. And the German fleet claimed to have been victorious.
One German newspaper even quoted the Kaiser as saying, "The myth of Trafalgar has been broken. We've ended the blockade. Germany has achieved its objective on the seas. We hold the trident now, not Britain."
It was a claim that initially made sense. Only 2 major German ships had been sunk, and their death toll was 2,551 men. The British had come off far worse. Over 6,000 souls had perished, and 6 major ships sunk. As the Grand Fleet struggled home, the trauma of it all sank in. Bert Stevens was a stoker on board HMS Chester.
When we come out that scrap, we had terribly bashed about. When we got about 100 miles from Grimsby, Captain Lawson says, "I'm going to stop the ship." He said, "Well, I'll have to take a chance. We can't take these men in, they're too bad." And he stopped the ship, and we buried the worst ones over the side, see? Had them in canvas, and we put a dummy shell in over the side. I forget how many we buried, I couldn't say. I know it was a terrible thing.
The Royal Navy had suffered, but once the smoke cleared, the claims of a German victory rang hollow.
Jutland was what was known as a fleet in being victory for the British.
Strategically, the battle changed nothing. The British blockade was still in effect, and the German battle fleet was in no shape to go to sea for a number of weeks.
It was a defeat, because finally it was proven that the High Seas Fleet could not end the war in favor of Germany.
There was one clear winner of this great battle. It was the dreadnoughts themselves.
The interesting thing about Jutland is it shows the power of the defensive technology that's been introduced with the Dreadnought and then the super Dreadnought battleship. The British lose 3 battle cruisers, the Germans lose an elderly pre-Dreadnought battleship and a battle cruiser. Not one Dreadnought battleship is sunk at Jutland.
I think this proves the quality of shipbuilding, of ship construction of these Dreadnought-class vessels on both sides. They really were formidable ships.
Jackie Fisher's vision of super warships had demonstrated their awesome power, but their influence on sea power was perhaps not quite what he'd foreseen. His dreadnoughts had been able to destroy everything in their gun sights except each other. But Fisher would have been happy that the outcome favoured Britain. In the aftermath of Jutland, the German surface navy was again confined to port.
A month after Jutland, Admiral Scheer writes a confidential report to the Kaiser in which he admits as such. He says that one of the lessons we've learned from this battle is that we cannot defeat the Royal Navy at sea in a Mahanian sense. We cannot annihilate their battle fleet. That's beyond our capability. We have to think of something else.
From now on, German submarines attacked commerce shipping in the Atlantic, a tactic that eventually brought the USA into the war, increased the Allies' strength, and helped end the war itself. But the peace was fragile, and there remained one massively powerful weapon that needed to be handled very carefully: the German Dreadnought fleet.
The British don't fear the remains of the German Navy. The biggest British fear is that smaller nations will make a play for those battleships and increase their own navies as a consequence. And in particular, they're worried about France and Italy, both of whom have said that they want some of these German dreadnoughts. So pretty much the top of the shopping list for the British is to have the German Navy handed over and interned.
The German fleet was disarmed. The breeches of the gun were left in Wilhelmshaven, so together with the ammunition. So they were absolutely defenseless. They had only a minimum of coal, only a skeleton crew on board, and then steamed over the North Sea to Scapa Flow to be interned.
König was the final German battleship to enter the Scottish naval base. Here, this once mighty fleet awaited its fate. But a secret plan meant the Germans would take back control of their dreadnoughts. In 1916, most of Britain's fleet of super dreadnoughts had fought Germany's in the defining naval battle of the war. They hadn't won, but more importantly, proved they couldn't be beaten. This played a key role in Germany's eventual defeat. 7 months after the war, the victorious Allies met in Versailles to decide how to punish Germany and what to do with her vanquished but still awesomely powerful fleet of dreadnoughts, now anchored in Scapa Flow under Royal Navy Guard.
In summer of 1919, a rumour spreads through the German fleet that the war is going to start again. And they're sitting there in the main British base with no ammunition on their ships and virtually no crews. But the one thing that they can choose to do to make that gesture that they're still part of the war is to scuttle their own ships, and that's exactly what they do.
On the 21st of June 1919, almost the entire British Guard fleet left Scapa Flow on exercises. The German commander's secret plan was put into action.
By a prearranged signal, they opened their seacocks, and the whole fleet started to sink. That was the way the Germans could salvage an element of self-esteem out of their predicament, was to deny these ships to the Allies.
400,000 tons of finest German steel going down.
The main Royal Navy Guard fleet rushed back to Scapa as the ship slipped under the waters. Claude Schulz was on board HMS Revenge.
We're rushing into Scapa Flow. We could see the German ships, some of them had sunk, and others were going over and sinking. We could see ships going all over the place. And we said, well, thank Christ for that. We'd been up here nearly 6 months waiting for our war service leave. Now we'll go down home and get our service leave. The bastards are gone.
The sinking of one of the world's most powerful dreadnought fleets was and remains the greatest loss of ships in one day.
100 years on from that Midsummer's Day, moving commemorations have been taking place in Orkney to mark the event.
This has been one of the most unusual memorial events, marking what's thought to have been the only occasion in history in which a navy destroyed its own fleet, and in little over 3 hours.
When I was there on the centenary of the Scuttling of the High Seas Fleet, I felt grief, regret about the waste of so many fine ships and also so many fine men in a war that certainly was one of the most useless wars in European history.
Not only had World War I been a tragic waste of human life, the Dreadnought arms race had also been cripplingly expensive for all countries involved. But that didn't stop the rush to build more of them.
Dreadnought battleships are still the currency by which nations measure their power and their prestige. They are the nuclear weapons of their day. They determine the most important nations. Smaller nations are desperate to build 1 or 2 dreadnoughts just to show that they can have a seat at the top table.
The Washington Naval Treaty of 1921 to 1922 between Britain, France, Italy, America and Japan greatly reduced the size and number of battleships built in the coming years. Many famous dreadnoughts were also scrapped. HMS Dreadnought, the ship whose name had become a byword for the ultimate battleship, had been unceremoniously scrapped a year later. But Iron Duke survived, staying in service another 20 years. However, there was one dreadnought whose story had only just begun.
I think Texas is the world's greatest warship, not because she fought in the most battles, but because she symbolizes a lot of what naval warfare is about. Texas is here. She's still a touchstone for that history. And she's the only capital ship left that was involved in 2 world wars. That's significant.
Following the war, Texas was modernized with radio communication equipment, radar, anti-aircraft defenses. She even had her own seaplanes. When World War II broke out, Texas was still fighting fit and thrown into the fray. She protected North Atlantic convoys from U-boats, supported North African landings before being called up to help out on June 6, 1944.
At D-Day, June 6, she's right off the coast of Normandy, providing that gunfire support. Later on, June 25th, the Allies were taking Cherbourg, the port town that they needed to, and she was right off of the shore there providing gunfire support and basically occupying those big 240 millimeter German guns. So they were in a duel. She was bracketed over 60 times and hit twice. One of those shells came in right above us and exploded. It took out the bridge above us, injured a couple of gentlemen in here. But you can see this armor's up to 12 inches thick here. And so she could take around. She's still able to be effective, still greatly feared. And so she was basically a decoy and providing that support and a distraction while the army was moving in and taking over the port.
With the north coast of France secure, Texas was sent to the Pacific, where she supported the American troops in the bitter fighting on Iwo Jima and Okinawa in the dying days of World War II. Even then, Texas's war wasn't over.
At Los Angeles, anxious crowds await a fleet contingent of their own, the battleships Texas and Nevada, both veterans of 2 wars and 5 invasions.
Perhaps the highest note of her career, she did what the U.S. referred to as magic carpet rides. She brought home over 4,200 soldiers, sailors, and Marines. So she went out in a high style.
And for the loved ones who had waited, nothing can compare with this moment.
USS Texas had survived, but the great battle fleets of dreadnoughts would never be seen again. Next time, the aircraft carrier. That audacious hybrid of flying and sailing that changed how war at sea was waged. These giants have become the most fearsome conventional weapons ever built, and the truest measure of a nation's naval strength.